So likewise, if we are not able to so likewise, if we are not able to measure quality, we won't be able to control quality either. So that is why the bottom line is that assessing the attainment of quality is the key to quality control and enhancement. So assessing the attainment of quality means we are measuring quality, and quality control would invariably mean enhancement of quality, because obviously nobody would like to bring the quality down. So quality control would mean enhancing quality, right? So that will be our point of discussion today, quantifying quality, right? So now, levels of quality in education. What are the different levels of quality in education? Let's see. The first and the foremost level that we see is approval. In approval, you have the bare minimum things at hand. For example, the classrooms are there, the teachers are employed, labs are in place, library is there, you provide the approval. That is what is called approval, the first and the foremost level in the quality of education. For example, in the realm of technical education, the All India Council for Technical Education provides the approval. Then next, you start talking about quality. And when you talk about quality, one term that comes to our mind is ISO, International Organization for Standardization. So just as you have ISO certification for the goods, you also have the ISO certification for the services, and more so for the educational services. Now they start looking into quality, not just whether the teachers are employed, but what is the qualification of teachers who are employed, whether the classrooms are smart classrooms or not, whether they are having the teaching aids or not, modern teaching aids, whether the books available in the library, they are of the latest edition or not, whether the equipment in the lab, are they adequate and are they sophisticated enough, and so on. So you talk about quality. Now things should stop there, but it doesn't, because the next higher level is accreditation, which not only provides the quality check but also provides the mutual recognition. Why do I say this mutual recognition? In order to understand mutual recognition, let us understand one very basic point that many of you, I suppose, won't be knowing. So try to understand this very basic point. In India, no university can become a university unless passed by an act of law. I'll repeat that in India, no university can become a university unless passed by an act of law.
Assalamualaikum, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry, I got disconnected. So I'm back.
Yes.
So I was just saying that the two levels, one is the approval and the other one is International Organization for Standardization Certification. That should be enough. But no, there is one additional thing that we are looking for, which is mutual recognition. Not just the quality check, but the mutual recognition. What do I mean by mutual recognition? For that, I need to understand one very basic point. As I said, in India, no university can become a university unless passed by an act of law. So if it happens to be an act of the Indian Parliament, that becomes a central university. And if it happens to be an act of any state assembly, then it becomes a state university. So now you know the difference between a central university and a state university. It's not about funding. It's more about where the law has been passed, right? Because there could be many private universities which are not receiving funding from anywhere, but still they may be categorized as a central university or the state university depending on where the act has been passed. For example, Aligarh Muslim University has AMU Act, BHU has BHU Act, and likewise. It may happen that many central university may have a combined university act, but there has to be an act which backs a university. So in that sense, act is paramount. Next to act are statutes, and then we have ordinances, and then we have regulations. So act will be very concise, precise. Its further elaboration will happen in the statutes. Further elaboration will happen in the ordinance, and then further elaboration will happen in the regulation. It may happen that ordinance and regulations may be categorized further as either academic ordinance or administrative ordinance. Likewise, regulation may be administrative regulation or academic regulation. But all of them are receiving power from the act which has been passed in the legislative body, parliament or state assembly. So now, for example, the vice chancellor of a university will draw power from the act and statutes, which in turn draws power from the parliament or the state assembly. Now the vice chancellor appoints a pro vice chancellor or a dean or HOD. So all of them will draw power from the vice chancellor, and vice chancellor will draw power from the act and statutes, and they will draw power from the state assembly or the parliament. So that is how power percolates down. In much the same sense, this mutual recognition in accreditation comes from an accord, an agreement that may have been signed by several signatory countries, right? So they sign an agreement to the effect that we will mutually recognize the degrees accredited by the respective board, right? So that is the additional advantage of undergoing accreditation. Now you must have heard about two bodies, NAAC and NBA. NAAC provides an institute-wide accreditation, whereas NBA provides degree-specific accreditation. Both of them have their own pros and cons. For example, NAAC has the advantage that if the institute gets the accreditation, all the degrees awarded by that institution, they stand accredited. That is an advantage. Whereas in the case of NBA, they provide degree-specific accreditation, saying that let the weaker degrees be left out and they should not pull down the stronger degrees also from not being accredited, right? So both of them have their own pros and cons. So these two are the bodies that provide accreditation in India, NAAC and NBA, right? Now, next, let us see what is accreditation. So this is one of the many definitions that you may come across accreditation. You might be wondering that definition has to be unique. Why I'm saying one of the many definitions? See, when something is very broad, very diversified, then you may have different views about it. Let me remind you of the good old story that you must have heard in your childhood days, that a few blindfolded persons were asked to touch an elephant and describe it. So the blindfolded person who touched the trunk of the elephant, he said it's like a python. The blindfolded person who touched the tummy of the elephant, he said it's like a wall. The person who touched the legs of the elephant, he said it's like a tree trunk. The person who touched the ears of the elephant, he said it's like a big hand fan. So the same animal being described differently by different people because it is too big an animal to be envisaged by a single description. Right? So similarly, accreditation is a very broad term. So this is the definition that I like the most, so that is why I'm sharing with it. What does it say? It says formal recognition. Things have to be formalized. You cannot take it casual or informal. So formal recognition of an educational program or institution, as the case may be. Program in the case of NBA and institution in the case of NAC, as just now we saw. By an external agency, I've underlined external agency, I'll tell you why. On the basis of impartial assessment. Again, impartial is underlined. Impartial assessment of the attainment of specific requirements against well-defined criteria. So let us first talk about why do I emphasize external agency. See, we have to avoid the conflict of interest. You cannot go on saying that let us carry out accreditation internally, we will be impartial, we will be fair, please accept it. No, that is not acceptable. It is just like, suppose I am a part of the selection board where my brother or my son is appearing. I may go on saying that I'll be impartial, I'll not do anything favoring them, but I will not be allowed because I have the conflict of interest. So external agency means such an agency which doesn't have any conflict of interest with the institution whatsoever. Whenever we go as an external member or the chairman of the review team, we have to sign a declaration that we haven't been part of the board of management, we haven't helped the university in any way whatsoever, and so on. So first and the foremost is to avoid the conflict of interest in the favor of fairness. So it has to be an external agency. And the external agency also should carry out impartial assessment. When I say impartial, what do I mean? See, there are two terms, subjective and objective. As teachers, we have very narrow perception of subjectivity and objectivity. Whenever we say objective, immediately it comes to our mind that I'm talking about MCQs, multiple choice questions, true, false, fill in the blanks. And subjective means essay type. That is not wrong, but that's a very narrow perception. When I say objective, it means whether the answers are evaluated by teacher A or B or C or whomsoever, the marks will remain the same. In the subjective essay type question, the same essay may be evaluated differently by different teachers. One may give a 8 out of 10. The same essay may be evaluated as 8.5 out of 10 by another teacher and yet 9 by 10 by another teacher. So that sense of subjectivity must be avoided in accreditation. That is what impartial means. So impartial means it has to be objective. No matter which team comes, the evaluation result should come out to be the same. And last but not the least, it has to be a well-defined criteria. The rules of the game has to be told before the game begins. You cannot keep on changing the goalpost after the game has begun. So declare that these are the criteria that I'm going to evaluate you on and let them prepare. Things should not be hidden, right? Let everything be in the open and let people prepare. See, this is our problem. We try to hide the law and then catch the people. Or as teachers, our job is to prevent the unfair means. Our goal is not to catch the student resorting to unfair means. We should stop them from cheating. Let me tell you a real story. Once I went to pick up somebody from the international airport at Delhi. And that was an elderly person, so I wanted to pick him from as close as possible. So there was a policeman sitting. I drove in front of him that if he has to stop me, he'll stop me. He didn't stop me, so I kept on driving and I went and picked up that elderly person. When I came back, the policeman stopped me. Why did you go in the no entry zone? I said, nowhere you have written the no entry zone. I couldn't see anywhere written it is as the no entry zone. He said, but I am sitting here. So I told him, look, I drove in front of you slowly. If you had to stop me, you should have stopped me. You did not stop me. You let me go. And now when I'm coming back, you're catching me. So what he said, he said, उस वक्त मैं रोक लेता तो इस वक्त आपको पकड़ता कैसे? If I had stopped you then, how would I go and catch you now? So his aim was to catch me rather than preventing me from going into the no entry zone. So that should not be the spirit. Our spirit is that we should let everybody prepare on fair grounds and let them come out with the success as far as the accreditation process is concerned. So it has to be a well-defined criteria. So formal recognition, impartial assessment, and well-defined criteria, right? Now, what is the accreditation in India? As just now I said, institutional accreditation by National Assessment and Accreditation Council, NAC, which is an autonomous body established by the University Grants Commission in 1994. For technical programs, National Board of Accreditation provides diploma level to postgraduate level in engineering, management, architecture, pharmacy, hospitality, mass communication, and the list may go on, adding more and more subjects. So what is the significance? I'm not devoting more time to it because I have already discussed the difference between NAC and NBA, right? So now talking about, in the next slide, what is the significance of accreditation? At national level, it is easier for students and parents to select the institutions and programs for admissions. Easy. If the institution is accredited, go for it. Take admission there because your degree will be mutually recognized in all the signatory countries. It also helps employers in deciding about the institutions for recruitment of graduates. If the degree or the institution is accredited, go and employ students from there because they must be meeting certain quality check. It helps institutions to avail the benefits from regulatory bodies and funding agencies. It happened with us. We had the NBA accreditation for all our UG programs in our engineering college. So we could get a hefty funding of 15 crores from World Bank under TechIP 2 project. And then again under TechIP 3 phase, we could get another 7.7 crores. So their deliverable and their prerequisite was to get all the degrees accredited. So we could get it, so we could get the accreditation done, so we could get the funding. Likewise, you must have heard about grade 1 autonomy by UGC, grade 2 autonomy, grade 3 autonomy. Certain privileges are extended on the basis of the NAC score, right? So regulatory bodies or funding agencies, they can benefit you if you have the accreditation in place. It also helps institutions in deciding about transfer of students or the exchange of students. It is easier. Suppose two institutions are accredited, which means they are at the same level. So you can mutually exchange students seamlessly. You can exchange students. But if suppose one institution is accredited, the other is not accredited, they are not at the same level, then you have to have all the exercise of finding out degree equivalence, whether the syllabus is the same or not, and so on. So the institutions are helped in exchange of students through accreditation. So these are the advantages at the national level. At international level, it is easier for the mobility of students for pursuing either higher studies or employment in other countries, right? So what do I understand? What do I mean by mobility? That is what I'm going to discuss in the next slide. But as of now, we should understand that mobility in terms of higher studies and in terms of employment is easier if accreditation is in place. So what do I mean by global mobility, right? This global mobility comes under the multinational accords for mutual recognition of accrediting process and thereby recognizing the accreditation. For example, Washington Accord was signed in 1989 for engineering degree programs, Sydney Accord in 2001 for engineering diploma or polytechnic programs, Dublin Accord in 2002 for technicians programs, Seoul Accord for professional engineers in computing and IT related fields. So all these accords, they provide the global mobility. So let us see, how do they provide the global mobility? Let me take an example of Washington Accord alone. This is an accord signed among 6 countries to begin with: Australia, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, UK, and US in the year 1989. What does it mean? Suppose a degree is accredited by the Ireland Board of Accreditation. Now, as per the accord, this degree will have to be necessarily accepted by the countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK, US. Nobody can refuse to accept that degree. Likewise, if a degree is accredited by the New Zealand Board of Accreditation, as per the accord, it has to be necessarily accepted by Australia, Canada, Ireland, UK, United States. So this is the power of accord which percolates down to accreditation. ये सारे देश उस डिग्री को मान्यता देने में प्रतिबद्ध हैं. They are duty bound to accept all those degrees. Nobody can refuse because they have signed an accord. So the purpose was to mutually recognize and accept the qualifications accredited by signatories. The accord at present has 15 full signatories and 5 provisional signatories. The list may keep on increasing, decreasing. Members of Washington Accord have outcome-based accreditation. So see, the power to outcome-based education comes from the Washington Accord, because they have agreed that we will follow outcome-based education. So that is why it becomes necessary that we understand what is outcome-based education, because Washington Accord will provide recognition only on the basis of outcome-based education, right? So now there are certain accreditation models. One is the minimal model, which does not encourage continuous improvement. It talks about the situation as of today. What are the conditions today? It doesn't look at future. That in fact is a problem for the developing countries. Suppose I have to design a bridge, I will look at the traffic condition as of today. I'll design the bridge. Now the problem comes that by the time the bridge gets completed, it has already fallen short of the traffic requirements. What do the developing countries do instead? They extrapolate the traffic data to next 15 years, 20 years. And then they design the bridge. And then they attach an expiry date to the bridge, that this bridge is good for next 15 years or 20 years, whatever data they have taken into account. After 15 or 20 years, they will sit down again and evaluate whether the bridge is good to go or it should be brought down and replaced. If the traffic has exceeded its limit, they will discard the bridge and construct a new bridge. So we have to be futuristic in that sense. We should not just be looking at the conditions as of today. We have to see whether this institution or the degree is going to sustain the test of time and quality for next 5 years, 10 years, whatsoever. So this is the minimal model. Next is the input-output model, right? This input-output model. What do I mean by input-output model? I look at the quality of students admitted and I look at the quality of graduates emerging from an educational institution. Yet the next model is outcome-based model. Suppose I am given the most fertile piece of land. I am a farmer. I am given a most fertile piece of land. I am given the best seeds. I am given the best fertilizers, ample amount of water, but the crop is not up to the mark. So that means there is something fundamentally wrong with the process. What ultimately matters to a farmer? It is the crop or the yield that matters for the farmer, right? Likewise, what should matter to an educational institution is the quality of graduates emerging from there. It should not just be talking about the quality of students admitted, but it should look at the quality of graduates emerging from an educational institution. ठीक है, पैदावार देखनी पड़ेगी, पैदावार कितनी अच्छी है ना. So in that sense, outcome based education has to be viewed. Now, what is the definition of outcome based education? Starting with a clear picture of what is important for students to be able to do, then organizing the curriculum, delivery and assessment so that the learning happens in that direction. Starting with a clear, you have to set the goal first. Suppose there is an athlete who has to take a high jump. Now this athlete sets the bar first, right? The athlete sets the bar first and then asserts to cross that bar. It never happens that the athlete says that, look, let me take a jump and then after that you can see whether I've crossed the bar or not. No. You will make him jump first. You will make him set the goal first. Probably my slides have gone, so let me reshare my slide. Give me a minute. Let me reshare my slide. Just wait for a moment. So till such time that my slides are back, let me keep talking. So what I do is I try to set the bar. Similarly, suppose there is a weightlifter. So the weightlifter will first set the weights and then will try to lift that weight, right? That is what a weightlifter will do. And if he's able to lift that weight, he will increase the weights on both sides again, right? So likewise, I should set the goal of education first, and then try to achieve it in terms of curriculum, in terms of delivery, and in terms of assessment. You might be wondering that I'm giving you the examples of areas from sports. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. So I was just saying
Yes, sir.
that you must be wondering that why am I giving all the examples from the realm of sports and not from education, because we are talking about outcome based education. So let me give you an example from outcome based education also. Any good book you pick up, any good book you pick up, in the beginning of every chapter you will see that the author will tell you what all are the points that you must try and understand during the course of that chapter. Now, how does it help? It helps because you are extra cautious whenever you come across that point in the chapter. At the end of the chapter, the author again, in the summary, he again summarizes that these are the points that you must have learned from this chapter. In case you haven't, you will start all over again. You will start from the beginning and you will see whether you have learned those points or not, right? So likewise, in the realm of education too, you are able to see whether the goals are set in the beginning and you are able to go through those goals, right? Mazhar Sahab, are you there? For some reason, I'm not able to share my slides. Hello, admin? Hello. हेलो बदर साहब.
जी सर।
अरे हमारी स्लाइड्स नहीं शेयर हो पा रही, पता नहीं क्या चक्कर है.
मैंने आपको को होस्ट तो बना रखा है।
वही तो मैं देख रहा हूँ क्या वजह है. वो बटन मेरा इनेबल ही नहीं हो रहा है, स्लाइड शेयर वाला.
सर री लॉग इन करिए सर, लॉग आउट करके।
अच्छा. हाँ कुछ फास्ट हुआ, अब शायद शेयर हो जाए, देखिए.
हो गया सर, हो गया।
हो गया ठीक है, चलिए. ओके. Okay, so I was just saying that in outcome based education, you start with a clear picture of what is important for students to be able to do, then organizing the curriculum, delivery, and assessment to make sure learning happens. Pictorially, I can show outcome based education by a diagram in which I set the goal first. I set the goal first, which is the outcome based education, right? And what the students should be able to do. And then the outcome based education and outcome based learning and teaching, how to make a student achieve that outcome. And in the end, I should do the assessment to make sure that the students have achieved what I intended them to achieve from the very beginning, right? So this is what outcome based education is all about. Now the next slide is very important because it gives you the essence of what is outcome based education in a nutshell. This is the pyramid of outcome based education. You must notice that the design goes from top to bottom. You have to design the vision first, followed by mission, then program educational objectives, then program outcomes, and then course outcomes. I'll explain all of them one by one. I'll explain all of them. But the assessment goes from bottom to up. You have to first assess the course outcome, then program outcomes, then program educational objectives, then mission, and then vision. One thing also you should notice from this slide that program outcomes should be aligned with graduate attributes. Graduate attributes are the qualities that the graduates should have at the time of graduation, right? So that is why program outcomes are aligned with graduate attributes. So this is the pyramid of outcome based education. Now let us understand all these levels one by one. First, let us understand what is the difference between the vision and mission, the top two levels. In order to understand what is vision, let me tell you a story. When we were students of engineering, we had a professor of mechanical engineering, a senior professor. He had an old Fiat car. Those were the times when only two cars existed in the Indian market, Ambassador or Fiat. Any third car was supposed to be an imported car. So just imagine he had an old Fiat car at the back of which was a sticker which said, "When I grow up, I want to be a Rolls Royce." Sounds funny, an old Fiat car having a sticker, "When I grow up, I want to be a Rolls Royce." May sound funny, but that is a very good example of what the vision has to be like. What do you want to become when you grow up? How do you want your institution or the university to grow in the next 50 years, 40 years, 30 years, whatsoever? Now, mission are the shorter goals to achieve vision, to reach vision. For example, in computer science, operating systems, we teach long-term scheduling and short-term scheduling. So even if you don't know operating system, from the very name, you can guess that long-term scheduling is the vision and short-term scheduling is the mission. Again, let me give you an example. Suppose any player wants to become the number one player in the whole world. That is his or her vision. Now he or she will set shorter goals. How many runs am I going to score in this series? How many wickets am I going to take? How many catches I'm going to hold? So now by match, series by series, as he or she keeps meeting his mission, a day would come when he or she would become the number one player. So this is about vision and mission. Vision is the long-term planning and mission is the short-term planning to reach the long-term planning. These are the upper two levels of the pyramid of outcome-based education. Now, what is the process of articulation of vision and mission? This vision and mission of your institution will not come in your dream. And even if it comes in your dream, don't take as it is, because you have got it the easy way. You will not put your efforts in order to achieve that vision and mission. So follow the process. And what is the process? First thing is that the department vision and mission has to be aligned with the institute vision and mission. Now, two questions arise here. Why the alignment in the first place? And if there is alignment, why are you telling us just the department vision mission? Why not institute vision mission? What should it be aligned with? So let me answer the second question first. I'm telling you about department vision mission because I assume that all of you are young faculty members. Right now, you will be having the departmental responsibilities. A day would come when you will become senior faculty members, you will become directors, vice chancellors, and so on. Then you will be worried and concerned about the institute vision and mission, but the process will remain the same. The only thing is that institute vision and mission will have to be aligned with the vision and mission of the founder. Founder may be a trust or a body or a person, whosoever. You have to align the institute vision and mission with the founder vision and mission, and department vision mission has to be aligned with the institute vision and mission. Now, why alignment? I hope you have heard about that joke in which four friends pooled up money and bought a car to run as a taxi. The first day, nobody hired their car. Why? Because all four of them kept sitting in the car themselves. So nobody found it unoccupied, so nobody hired the car. They were told to get down from the car so that people see it unoccupied, then people will hire it. Now the next day they did get down from the car, but the car did not start. So they wanted to push it to start. They kept on pushing the whole day, but the car did not move even an inch, because two of them were pushing from front to back and two of them were pushing from back to front. The car did not move. It will move only if all four of them push in the same direction. Their push has to be aligned. So likewise, vision and mission of institute, founder, department has to be aligned. Otherwise, you are taking things in different directions. So once this alignment is in place, then you take the views of the faculty, industry, management, data on future, because you have to be futuristic. You cannot go for the minimal model. Look at what professional bodies are telling you to be like, and parents. You take the views of all of them. You take several iterations. You come up with draft 1.0. You go back to the stakeholders. Take their views. If the views are substantial, go for draft 2.0. If they are minor, go for draft 1.1. Take 1, 2, 3, 4 iterations, and then you decide about the instituted vision mission as the final outcome or the final decision about vision and mission. Even that final thing has not to be carved in stone proverbially. There has to be an expiry date to it. This vision and mission is good for next 40 years, 30 years. Maybe vision is good for 30 years, mission is good for 20 years, right? So after those 30, 20 years, we will revisit, we will either continue or modify or replace. As an example, let me tell you about the vision and mission of the engineering college that I was the principal of and I teach there. I'm not asking you to take this as your vision mission also. You follow the process. I'm just giving you the example. So you see, in line with the vision of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, since I was the principal, I have to formulate the vision and mission of the college institution. So I had to align it with the vision and mission of the founder, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. The Zakir Hussain College of Engineering and Technology has always stood for peaceful coexistence, academic excellence, and scientific temper. Right? So in line with this, we adopted our vision of the college to become an institute of excellence. So excellence taken from the vision of the founder in scientific. And since we were an engineering college, so we added technical education, right? So we added technical education over here. And research with the standards at par with national and international institutes of repute, and to serve as quality human resource provider to the society and industry, the peaceful coexistence. Now, in order to reach this vision, we have shorter mission statements: to offer state-of-the-art UG, PG doctoral programs, to make policies and atmosphere to attract and retain best faculty, to create an ambience in which new ideas and cutting-edge research flourish through effective curriculum and infrastructure, so as to produce the leaders and innovators of tomorrow, to produce ethically strong and morally elevated human resource to serve mankind, to undertake collaborative projects and consultancy for long-term interaction with the academia and industry, to be among top 10 engineering institutes of India. So as we keep meeting our mission statements, a day would come that we will be able to reach our vision statement also. So after the first two levels, vision and mission, the second two levels are PEOs and POs. If you remember in that pyramid, right? Vision and mission has been taken care of. Now let us look at PEO and PO. PEO are the qualities that the graduates should have 4 or 5 years after graduation. How did they self-develop themselves? Whereas PO are the qualities that the students should have at the time of graduation. That is why it is aligned with graduate attributes. At the time of graduation, we didn't tell them how to be an entrepreneur, how to be a teacher, how to be a businessman, how to be an industrialist. They will self-develop in 4 or 5 years. So these are the qualities that will be covered under PEO. As an example, to differentiate between PO and PEO, let me take the example of a fruit. The fruit is ripe, which means PO achieved. At the time of graduation, PO achieved. Now this fruit will go out in the market. People will assess how is the smell of that fruit, how is its appearance, how is its taste. That is program educational objective. How does the market look at the graduates that are emerging from you? So this is the difference between PEO and PO. PEO are the qualities in the experienced graduates, whereas PO are the qualities in the fresh graduates, right? They also should follow a process to be formulated. Just as we had the R2 process of defining vision and mission, we should also have a process of defining PEOs. With the institute vision and mission, you had aligned the department vision and mission. With department vision and mission, you will align with PEO. So you should have the graduate attributes taken into account, and then you follow a consultation process from the faculty, from students, data on future alumni, industry, in professional bodies. You take the views of all of them. Their views will be collected by the program coordinator. Their views will be summarized by the program assessment committee, and that will be accepted or asked for review by the department advisory board. You may take 1 iteration, 2 iterations, several iterations, And finally, you will converge on the PEOs, program educational objectives, and then you attach an expiry to it that these PEOs are good for 10 years, 15 years, whatsoever. So this is the process of formulating PEOs. Before looking at the process of POs, let us look at graduate attributes, because we have to align our POs with the graduate attributes. So there are 12 graduate attributes. Since I am from the engineering discipline, I have written engineering there. You add whatever discipline you belong to. For example, I am saying engineering knowledge, you say science knowledge, arts knowledge, whatsoever. Next is problem analysis. This is a very important step. Steve Jobs, he says that if you have defined the problem correctly, you have achieved half the solution. So problem analysis is a very crucial step. Design and development of solutions. And not just that, you should be able to investigate complex problems at the time of graduation, right? Then modern tool usage, very important. Suppose I have to dig the ground today. If I come up with Phawda Khurpi, the people who have the modern digging tools, they will have a better start, right? I remember when we were students, we had a vice chancellor at our university from IIT Kharagpur. So he used to say then, there was a time if somebody didn't know English, he was treated as illiterate. And then he used to say then, now is the time if somebody doesn't know computers, he will be treated as illiterate. So let me continue in the same fashion and say today that if somebody doesn't know artificial intelligence, he will be treated as an illiterate person. So AI has to be taken as a tool, not confined just to computer engineers or scientists. Just as computer is now a tool for everybody, arts people, social science, accountants, everybody is using computers. Computers is no more confined to just the people from computer area. So likewise, the tools may keep changing, and we have to learn, our graduates have to learn to embrace the new tools coming up. Engineer and society. Let me throw a question at you. Have you ever wondered why Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley? Actually, Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley because Stanford University and University of California at Berkeley are there. These two giant universities have developed an ecosystem around them. Their graduates created these startups. Those startups became success stories. Then they started employing more graduates. They started even employing faculty members from these universities. They provided funding so that better research may come out from these universities. In a country like ours, we have very good institutions, IITs, IIMs, central universities, NITs. But outside the four walls of the IITs, IIMs or central universities, a rickshaw puller, a tea seller or a hawker just doesn't know what this IIT is all about, what this IIM is all about. So the benefits are not percolating down to society. So an educated person should be looking at societal needs. Next is environment and sustainability. I have no hesitation in admitting that we, the engineers, are the biggest culprit of destroying the environment. Because out of our zeal and enthusiasm, we overdo things. I remember when we were young, this polythene came into market. Everybody was overjoyed. Oh, wonder material, so light, so thin, waterproof, insulator. We overproduced plastic and polythene. Now we are crying hopes. It's not decaying. It has become an environmental hazard. I read somewhere, we learn from history that we do not learn from history. We are not taking our lessons. We are repeating our mistakes. Today, everybody is talking about solar energy. Out of our enthusiasm and zeal again, we are putting solar panels everywhere without thinking what will happen to these solar panels when we will discard all of them 20 years, 25 years from now. We'll be again facing a problem. I do not say that we should not go for the non-conventional energy resources. But we have to weigh our pros and cons. We have to take things in a controlled manner. We have to keep the environment in mind. Today we are doing solar energy to save the environment. Tomorrow we will be discarding them to destroy the environment. So what use is it then? So we have to weigh all our options. Ethics, very important. You take the ethics out of an engineer, he'll sell the whole country away. Individual and teamwork, very important. A good player is the one who plays singles and who plays in the team equally well. So we should be able to perform alone and we should be perform in a group. You know what is the first lesson of collaboration we got? When in school we were asked this math question. If 5 people can do this work in 4 days, how many days will it take for 8 persons to do it? This is collaboration, right? So we have to collaborate and we should be confident enough to do things independently as well. Communication, very important. The only difference between the modern system of medicine and the traditional system of medicine is the communication or lack thereof. Our traditional, we had very good hakims, we had very good Veds in our history. But they did not pass this knowledge on to others and not even to their children, leave alone others. They went to the grave of the Shamshan Ghat with all the good knowledge and experience they had. So these traditional systems of medicine, they did not flourish. The modern system of medicine people, they went on communicating. So everybody will starting from where the previous one had left. Not that they had to start from scratch, everybody. They have reached to a point where they are doing heart transplant. They are putting the heart of an animal into the human beings. So communication is very important. Lifelong learning. If somebody graduates with a BTech degree and he says, that's it, I'm done with the engineering. No, it will start now. Somebody says after doing MBBS that I'm done with medicine. No, you will start practicing now. So it has to be a lifelong learning exercise in all the areas of education. Project management and finance, very important. Because everything runs on money. So you have to look at the financial viability. It has to be managed properly. Because suppose I'm designing a bridge and I don't follow the timeline, the flood comes, all my construction will be washed off. So I should be managing the project properly. So these are the 12 graduate attributes that I explained. So I'm skipping a few more slides because this is primarily the explanation of what I've already given you. Now, aligned with it, we have the program outcomes. They are the narrower statements that describe what students are expected to know and be able to do by the time of graduation. What are the guidelines for POs? They should basically describe knowledge, skills, and behavior of students as they progress through the program as well as by the time of graduation. They should not be too broad. They must align with the graduate attributes. They must reflect all the graduate attributes. So they should cover each and every graduate attribute and they should contribute to achieve PEOs. They should be upward compatible, right? Again, the process of defining POs is very similar to that of PEOs. Institute or department vision mission, you align your PEOs with that and then you align your POs with the PEOs. Graduate attributes, professional bodies, the consultation process has to be done from faculty, student, data on future, alumni, industry. Their views will be collected by the program coordinator, summarized by program assessment committee, accepted or reviewed one or several iterations by the department advisory board, and finally the POs will be defined, right? And again, the expiry date has to be attached. Now, I've gone through it hurriedly because it is very similar to that of defining PEOs. Now there is a new term that has recently come, PSO, program specific outcomes. How is it different from PO? In the case of PO, there has to be a one-to-one alignment of PO with GA. One graduate attribute, one PO. Whereas program specific outcomes may be lesser in number, but they are specific to a program, very focused. Again, in order to make you understand the difference between PO and PSO, let me give you an example of three universities: Aligarh Muslim University, Banaras Hindu University, Jawaharlal Nehru University. All these three places, MA in history is being taught. So the program outcomes of MA in history will be same across all three universities, because this is aligned with the graduate attributes. But PSO may differ. Aligarh Muslim University may say that our PSO is medieval history. BHU may say that our PSO is ancient history. JNU may say that our PSO is modern history. These are three phases of history that we study. So they may divide among themselves with different PSOs. Similarly, suppose BSc chemistry is being taught at several institutions. Their POs will remain the same across the institutions, but PSOs may differ. One institution may say that our PSO is organic chemistry. One institution may say our PSO is physical chemistry, and so on, right? So this is the difference between PO and PSO. Now last level. We have done vision, mission, PEO, PSO. The last is course outcomes. They have to be student focused, not professor focused. It is not what I can teach, rather what students should learn. So it should be learning oriented, not coverage oriented. What students have to learn, not what coverage I can provide. Then there has to be alignment between course, program, and institutional levels learning outcomes. Focus on ability central to the discipline. For example, you have a unit-wise syllabus, 4 units. The central idea of every unit may form a CO. So 4 units, 4 COs. Easy way, I'm telling you. Focus on aspects of learning that will endure. What do I mean by this? Let me tell you a real story. When I was doing PhD at IIT Delhi, there was this foreign diplomat who was visiting IIT Delhi. So he met one of the professors of computer science and he asked a question. Which programming language do you teach your students? The response of that professor of computer science from IIT Delhi was an eye-opener for me. That's a very deep response. He said, try to understand. He said, we don't teach them language. We teach them programming. Languages may keep coming and going. There was Fortran, then Pascal came, COBOL was there. Before that, BASIC was there. Then C came, C++, C#, Java, today Python. Tomorrow another language may come. If we just teach them language and the language goes out of market, my graduates will go out of market. Right? So instead of teaching them language, we should tell them programming, teach them programming, so that the language, as soon as a new language comes, my graduate should be able to pick up the syntax easily. So aspects of learning that will endure, that is what should form the COs. Limited to manageable number, should not be too many that we are not able to manage. And last but not the least, they should be specific enough to be measurable. They should not be vague that we are not able to measure. This is most important and fundamental to OBE, because what we can't measure, we won't be able to control. Right? So we've covered all the levels of outcome-based education. A few minutes on taxonomy. You must have heard about Bloom's taxonomy after Benjamin Bloom, 1913 to 1999. So let me go to the taxonomy levels in order to understand what these learning levels are, what Bloom's taxonomy learning levels are. First and the foremost is knowledge. Then on top of it is comprehension. Then on top of it is application. For example, earth is round. Knowledge. I learnt it by heart. Earth is round. Dunya gol hai, earth is round. Then comes comprehension. What do I mean by round? Is it circular? Is it elliptical? Is it oval? Is it flattened on the poles? That is comprehension. जानना फिर समझना. Knowledge जानना, comprehension समझना. Then application. Earth is round, it rotates, because of which days and night come, change. It revolves, because of which seasons change. That is application. So learning is increasing from knowledge to comprehension to application. Now, in order to understand the difference between analysis and synthesis, let me give you a small explanation. Suppose there is a system. System is something which delivers. For example, the difference between a computer and a computer system is, a computer is the hardware that you see. Now, when you combine the software, the power supply, the user, it delivers. Now it is a computer system. So this is the difference between a computer and a computer system. So you can have an electronic system, a mechanical system, an electromechanical system, or a social system, or a political system, any system. There will be some input to it and some output coming out of that system. Right? So suppose you know the input, you know the system, you have to find out the output. That is analysis. Right? You know the input, you know the system, you have to find out the output. That is analysis. If you know the system, you know the, if you know the input, you know the output, you have to find out the system. That is synthesis. So synthesis is more challenging than analysis. Then on top of it is evaluation, without which none of these levels could be measured and they could not be enhanced. So now this Bloom's taxonomy was revisited by Anderson and Krathwohl. By and large, the lower levels remain the same: knowledge to remember, comprehension to understand, application to apply. Analysis and synthesis were merged or collapsed into one level: analyze. Evaluation remained at its place. One level that was added on top of evaluation is to create. That is the highest level. In creation, you must have heard about three terms: invention, discovery, and innovation. What is the difference between invention and innovation? Suppose there were 2 points, point A and point B. Nobody knew how to go from A to B. Somebody came up with a path to go from A to B. That is invention. Now a path existed, but somebody came up with a better path to go from A to B, a shorter path. So that is innovation, right? The path did not exist. Somebody came up with the path for the first time. That is invention. Path existed, but somebody came up with a better path. That is innovation. In order to understand invention and discovery, let me tell you a joke. A child asked his father, "Dad, what is the difference between invention and discovery?" So the father said, "Son, look, it is like this. I discovered your mom and then we invented you. I discovered your mom and then we invented you. Your mom existed. I discovered her. And then both of us created you. You were not there." Right? So this is the difference between invention and discovery. So invention, innovation, discovery, they are all covered under creation. So analysis, synthesis, evaluation, or for that matter, creation, they're all higher order thinking skills. But knowledge, comprehension, application should be with every student at the time of graduation. So what are the OBE steps? Define outcomes, then design curriculum, then deliver instructions, document results. Very important. Suppose you move from one institution to the other, or you retired. Next person should start from where you left. If you're not passing it on through documentation, all your efforts are going waste. So why to waste your effort? Document it so that the next person should start from where you left and determine advancement. All this will be futile if we didn't determine the advancement. Now the next figure that I'm going to share with you is slightly complicated. But this single figure is going to make you understand assessment as well as improvement. So try to be with me and try to focus so that I can make you understand. I'll make it easy. I'm taking an example program. Suppose I'm saying BE in Triple E, right? BE in Triple E. You may take it as BA in history or MSc in chemistry, whatsoever. Remember, I told you assessment has to go from bottom to up. So first we have to do the CO evaluation. There will be two components to it, the direct component or the indirect component. We'll add both. So the direct component is the result of the course. For example, question 1 is from unit 1, certain marks. So what is the average marks scored in the question 1? CO1 pertains to unit 1. So you take the average, that will be the attainment, direct attainment of CO. Question 2 from unit 2 with CO2, what is the average marks? Likewise, that will be the direct component of the COs. Their indirect component will come from course end survey at the end of the semester as the students themselves. How much do you think CO1 has come in you? How much CO2 has come in you? How much CO3 has come in you? Right? Take the average. That will be indirect component. Then you combine the direct component and indirect component in a certain ratio. Maybe 70% direct, 30% indirect. Or 75% direct, 25% indirect. You must be wondering where this 75, 25, 70, 30 has come all of a sudden. See, whatever you decide, you declare it. You should not be changing the rules of the game after the game has begun. You shouldn't be waiting that let the result come. If the result is good, we will increase the direct component. But if the result is not good, we will increase the indirect component. No, that is not how it works. Whatever you keep, you are free to keep. But whatever you keep, declare it. So this is our CO evaluation. Now the CO evaluation will be the direct component for PO evaluation. All these POs in which COs are mapped, they will be evaluated on the direct component through CO evaluation. Their indirect component will come from alumni survey and exit survey. Ask the students graduating at the time their exit graduate feedback, how much do you think PO1 has come in you? How much PO2? Take the average, then combine them in a certain ratio, 70, 30, 75, 25, 80, 20, whatsoever. This PO evaluation will become the direct component for PEO evaluation. Their indirect component will come from alumni survey and employer survey. As the employer, one of our graduates had gone to your organization some 5 years, 10 years back. How is he performing as a director? How is he performing as an educator? How is he performing as a businessman? And so on. You ask the senior alumni. The difference between the alumni of PEO and the alumni for PO is that PO has all the alumni. Whereas the PEO evaluation alumni has to be taken only from the experienced graduates, right? Only from the experienced graduates. This trend will continue. PEO evaluation will become the direct component for mission. Their indirect component will come from the stakeholders. Then that will become the direct component for vision and so on. Now, this cycle or this stream shows you how to assess. Now I have measured, I must enhance. For that, I'll take the measured CO and compare it with the target CO. What is the difference? That is why I'm keeping plus minus. See the difference. At the indirect level, I had seen plus plus. How are they added? But over here, I have to see what is the shortfall. Similarly, measured PO and the target PO. What is the shortfall? Measured PEO and the target PEO. What is the shortfall? So all these have to be added together. The OBE admin will propose the improvement so that the next time you run the program, that should be a better program, and the gap between target CO and the achieved CO should narrow down. So this is the idea of assessment and improvement. So let me since I'm running short of time, let me skip a few slides. Now, how will this improvement happen? This improvement will be three-dimensional. Firstly, improve the curriculum, or improve the course delivery and assessment, or revise, redefine the POs. You may have set the bar too high. So instead of getting depressed, lower the bar. Or if you have crossed the bar, raise the bar. So these are the three-dimensional. One-dimensional is curriculum improvement, or course delivery and assessment improvement, or revise, redefine the POs. So the OBE framework may be summarized by the next slide. See, the top level is the institutional level, vision, mission. Then the next level is program level, PEOs and POs. And the next level color coded is COs. So there has to be a continuous cycle, assessment and improvement, assessment and improvement. This has to be a continuous cycle, year by year. You also have to take into account the industry and professional organizations' inputs and feedback, right? So this is what an OBE framework looks like. So there may be certain accreditation criteria. Next, what should be the process for redefining of POs? The third dimension, the three dimensions of improvement I've told. Change the curriculum, revise the curriculum, or change the delivery and assessment, or revise, redefine the POs. So what should be the process? You take the alumni survey, graduate survey, industry, program coordinator, module coordinator, POs assessment, faculty views. Is there a need for redefining POs? Yes. If it has to be a change in curriculum, go to Board of Studies. If it has to be a change in the delivery methods and course outcomes, you have to go to the module coordinator. If it has to be the program assessment committee, the change in POs, then go to program assessment committee, which will be finally accepted by the department advisory board. So this is the process for redefining of POs. Now we should also know when to assess what. So program educational objectives have to be assessed few years after graduation, 4 to 5 years. POs at the time of graduation, and course outcomes at the time of completion of every course, every semester, right? Redefining process of PEOs is very similar. You take the alumni survey, graduate survey, industry, program coordinator, faculty views, module coordinator, PEOs assessment. Is there a need for redefining PEOs? Yes. So identify the changes. If the changes are to be in the curriculum, go to Board of Studies. If the regulations have to be changed, go to Academic Council. If PEOs themselves have to be changed, go to the Program Assessment Committee, which will change after 1 or 2 or 3 iterations, and the Department Advisory Board will finally accept the redefined PEOs but attach an expiry date to it. After 10 years, we'll sit again. We will revisit. It may happen that we continue with the same PEOs, or we may modify them, or we may replace them altogether. So this is the approach for redefining of PEOs. So outcome-based education, it has to be assessed and it has to be enhanced in order to give us a better quality of education. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much. Thanks for your patient listening. I'll take questions now if there are any.
Dear participants, if you have any question, please ask Professor Bair. Anybody wants to ask anything? अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर,
Welcome.
जी मैं माफी चाहूंगा, नेट का थोड़ा इशू था, इस वजह से मैं आप शुरू में ज्वाइन नहीं कर पाया।
अरे मैंने वेट किया, फिर मैंने कहा कि टाइम हो गया तो मैं स्टार्ट कर देता हूँ, क्योंकि वक्त पे खत्म करना जरूरी था।
जी जी शुक्रिया। आजकल थोड़ा इशू बहुत ज्यादा हो रहा है नेट का।
हाँ नहीं, कोई बात नहीं, कोई बात नहीं।
जी जी जी
तो बताइए, somebody, anybody has any comment, any clarification, any suggestion, please go ahead.
सर अभी हम लोग ये पीओ पीएसओ वाला पूरा इशू है, वो हर जगह ही बड़ा हॉट टॉपिक है। और
जी।
यहाँ यूनिवर्सिटी, इंटीग्रल यूनिवर्सिटी में एनबीए एक्रेडिटेशन हम लोगों ने कंप्यूटर साइंस और फार्मेसी 2 डिपार्टमेंट का तो करा लिया है। उसके अलावा और भी डिपार्टमेंट को उसमें जाना है, तो काफी मेजर उसका बैकबोन एनबीए का ये ओबी पूरा सिस्टम ही है।
जी।
तो अगर आप लोगों को कोई क्वेश्चन हो तो प्लीज आप पूछ सकते हैं, अदरवाइज
देखिए, क्वेश्चन ना पूछने की 2 वजह हो सकती हैं, either you have understood everything or you have understood nothing. I don't know which side do you lie.
सर पहला वाला तो बड़ा मुश्किल है, लेकिन मुझे लग रहा है कि दूसरा वाला इशू है, क्योंकि सब कुछ समझना ओबी के बारे में तो अभी वाकई बड़ा मुश्किल है और बड़ा वक्त चाहिए इन सब चीजों के लिए। चलिए, ओके, ठीक है। सो सर बहुत शुक्रिया, आपने सर वक्त दिया, और थैंक यू वेरी मच सर, आपने अपने बिजी शेड्यूल से इतना वक्त निकाला, और थैंक यू वेरी मच सर। इतना हम लोग हमेशा से ही इंशाल्लाह, अगर
सर
जी शाहनवाज
सर मेरा एक क्वेश्चन है सर, वन क्वेश्चन सर। हेलो
जी सर, पूछिए
सर। can you explain sir, in industry there are 40 years before ISO and QS 9000 are implemented for improvement of quality of industry, but after 35 or 40 years education system adopted the work on quality system. How sir, can you?
No, actually, I told you that ISO certification was both for products as well as for services. So we realized that certification has to be done for services also. It should not just be for the products. So for 35 years, 40 years, ISO certification was being done just for the products. From the last few years, it is being done for services also. And when it is being done for services, then educational services also are included. So that is the idea.
Okay.
Any other question? No.
Okay.
चलिए,
ठीक सर, बहुत शुक्रिया सर, इंशाल्लाह जब मुलाकात होगी, और जी सर,
so I'll leave the meeting now.
शुक्रिया सर। Yes.
Thank you very much.
Dear participants, we will meet again for the next session.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
We will meet again at 4:30 for the next session, and please ask all your colleagues